instructional video. We will be examining the Avant-garde. Just so you know, this week has many short films to be watched, where I talk about each one as the movie is playing. I highly recommend watching another version of it on YouTube that doesn't have my voiceover on it. I think it'll be a much better experience, and you'll get the full film that way. So, the avant-garde and the experimental film people think of as synonymous. They're not quite synonymous. Avant-garde is a French military term for the front line. It's the first people going into battle. And so, avant-garde artists are a group of people who are extremely innovative. They are ahead of their time, and they create newness in art. And so, experimental, on the other hand, is people are working with experimental ideas and trying out new things. But the avant-garde tends to be political, where the experimental is just interested in trying out new things without a political kind of agenda. So, with that said, you need to understand that there are only three kinds of films that can be made: narrative, non-narrative, and avant-garde / experimental. So, of course, narrative are your fiction films, non-narrative are your documentaries, and then the avant-garde we're discussing today. And, of course, nowadays, these things have started to be blended, especially when it comes to documentary and fiction films. I would say that everybody has always been borrowing from the avant-garde, because the avant-garde is the first set of artists doing something new in film, and always Hollywood and other people look to the avant-garde for new ideas, grab those ideas, and bring them into film, which you'll see a lot of in next week's film, Moonlight, with the use of lighting and the use of sound are highly different from your normal Hollywood or independent films. So, I don't think I've given you a whole lot of ideas about the avant-garde yet, but they are challenging films. They're challenging because the avant-garde artist wants to challenge the audience. I like to think of realism as an opiate of the masses. And the avant-garde has always been opposed to realism. Of course, there was a moment where realism was avant-garde. It was a movement. And that movement has literally taken hold. Most of the stuff we see on TV, most of our films, most of our theater is realistic. And the avant-garde is opposed to that because with realism, what it does is it takes you on an emotional journey. And you get lost in the film, and you get lost in the story, and so you become mindless. But the avant-garde wants you to be active mentally the whole time. They also generally want you to rebel against what is happening in culture. And what I love about the avant-garde is they look at culture and see its issues, and they try to correct those through art itself. So, when you watch an avant-garde film, you need some strategies. And the most important strategy, the thing that avant-garde filmmakers do is they subvert narrative. And so you've got to realize when you're watching a great deal of avant-garde films, they're playing with narrative structure. They're breaking apart, they're twisting it. They're not even giving you the entire narrative. So you have got to get as many you've got to search for the narrative threads. And here we go, coming full circle. That seed I planted with the narrative worksheets was all about Avant-Garde Week. You have learned Vladimir Prop's 31 plot points. And you can easily use those plot points to help you understand an avant-garde film. No, you do not need to pull back out the sheet and look for a match. What you got in your brain is what you got. And if you can pick up the story threads, you'll be fine, and I think you can. It will still leave a lot open to interpretation, and that's part of being challenged. You having to apply an interpretation. You not having to be fed by somebody else. The avant-garde develops your mind and your perceptions. So, number one strategy, subversion of narrative. I cannot say that enough. Number two, which I think is very important, is compare it to other art forms. I noticed that a lot of avant-garde films can be related to poetry or music or different art movements like surrealism or Dada or futurism. Yes, I'm not going to go over those three things for you. I do teach a class in artistic collaboration workshop called VPA 228. It's open to all filmmakers and any artist whatsoever. And we go over a lot of different innovative, collaborative ideas that have created art throughout history, and all very avant-garde. But you will notice that these filmmakers will borrow from, especially the experimentalists, will borrow from artistic movements that have come before them. So, and when I talk about poetry, you're going to notice that I talk about that a lot when we're going to be watching Maya Deren's Messages of the Afternoon and Kenneth Anger's Fireworks. The reason why I say it's poetic is because it's the use of repetition. I definitely get that idea of verse, chorus, and on top of that, sometimes I feel like the editing of Stan Brakhage, it is so quick and fast-paced. I feel like each sequence, I feel that each little moment is a word itself, and all these words are added up together in Window, Water, Baby, Moving. So, yeah. And he plays around. I also think about music too, and the structure of music, like ABA form or ABA modified form, the sonata, the concerto. All of these things can help you understand the avant-garde films you're watching. The other thing that avant-garde films do is they play around with time and space. It does not function like it normally does in a realistic film. So I think surface cohesion is extremely important. So you will get pieces of things, and you've got to be thinking, does this piece go with that piece, and that piece go with that piece? You know, in Messages of the Afternoon, you'll notice that Maya Deren gives us the feeling of a living room, but we don't quite get it, and we don't know that we've quite transitioned from living room to bedroom, and what the two different spaces are. We get lost in it. So trying to hold what we know is in the living room is going to help us. Sometimes also, the avant-garde filmmaker gets really close to its subject, and so you can't quite make it out. So another reason why surface cohesion is important. And then one of my favorites, and I need some water, is radical metonymy, where something stands in for something else. And one of the best uses of radical metonymy that comes to mind is Fritz Lang's M. In it, you see a small girl walking the streets alone, and she has a balloon. And then all of a sudden, a shadow is behind her, and we realize she's being followed. And then we see that the balloon has been let go of, and it pops. And we know something terrible has happened to this little girl. So that's like a really extreme form of radical metonymy. But you will see many things that stand in for other things. And because of this thing standing in, it has an extra layer of interpretation. So now, I would like to read you two things. One, I want to read you Maya Deren's work. I find this to be very important, and this is the book I'm working with, The Essential Maya Deren. And she has this beautiful essay in here called The Amateur versus the Professional. The major obstacle for the amateur filmmakers is their own sense of inferiority vis-a-vis professional productions. The very classification amateur has an apologetic ring. But that very word, from the Latin amateur, lover, means one who does something for the love of the thing rather than for economic reasons or necessity. And this is the meaning from which the amateur filmmaker should take his cue. Instead of envying the script and dialogue writers, the trained actors, the elaborate staffs and sets, the enormous production budgets of the professional film, the amateur should make use of the one great advantage which all professionals envy him, namely freedom, both artistic and physical. And when I read that, I think about the French New Wave. So I just want to tie this back. The French New Wave got rid of that excessive crew so they could shoot film faster. So that's one of the things I think about. Everybody always wants more artistic freedom. So artistic freedom means that the amateur filmmaker is never forced to sacrifice visual drama and beauty to a stream of words. Words, words, words. To the relentless activity and explanation of a plot, or to the display of a star or a sponsor's product. Nor is the amateur production expected to return profit on a huge investment by holding the attention of a massive and motley audience for 90 minutes. Now that's another big thing that I love about the avant-garde, and not just the filmmakers. The avant-garde is opposed to words, on some level. Words get way too much emphasis. And I think very important to realize is that there are other experiences outside of words that you have. There are things that have occurred to you that you can't put into words. And so the avant-garde filmmakers are tapping into an experience we all have that is unnameable. So I wanted to pull that out. And that's one of the reasons why I chose Pina for you guys and that documentary, because it's mainly about movement and what movement communicates. And yes, there are words for the audience to hold on to, but it's operating on different levels.